Hi everyone, we're going to get the webinar underway. So welcome and thanks very much for joining us this evening. I'm Tim Jones from Doctors Without Borders. Before we start, I'd like to go over a couple of items quickly. When you log in, you'll see your control panel which has your audio options. If you have a microphone and speakers on your computer, you're welcome to use those. Otherwise, click the telephone button and you'll see the call-in number and the codes to use. Please keep these numbers in the webinar URL available during the webinar just in case your audio or video stalls. So tonight's presentation will last about 90 minutes. We're going to take your questions at the end. You can type your questions into the question box on the control panel at that time. And then just one more thing to do an audio check. Would a couple of you mind typing in, "I can hear you" in your control panel so we can just do a quick check. Okay, thanks a lot. So in terms of the material we're going to cover tonight, we'll start off with introductions in just a moment. Then we'll move on to MSF's charter, humanitarian principles, and activities in the field. We'll also talk about the recruitment process, requirements, and paramedical field roles, and then move on to operational structure and staff benefits. We're particularly excited to bring you a paramedical panel focusing on working in the field with 4 expats. And then we'll close with participant questions. So I'm Tim Jones. I'm the Interim Outreach Coordinator, and I'm joined by Rebecca Ricards.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. As Tim mentioned, I am currently here in our New York office working as a recruiter, but I have done 2 missions to the field. I first began in 2013 as an HR admin. I went to South Sudan for 9 months. I then took a little bit of a break and went back to Africa, this time to West Africa, Sierra Leone, for 4 months as a finance administrator. And like I mentioned, I'm here in New York helping with recruitment now.
So as I mentioned, we also have a panel of paramedical specialists, and they'll introduce themselves briefly now, and then we'll move on to a fuller discussion a little later in the presentation.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Sharmila Shetty. I am an epidemiologist and a pediatrician. I've done 4 missions with MSF, the first one starting in 1999, so I have quite a long history. But my first 3 missions were as a pediatrician, but my last mission, shouldn't say final, my last mission was in Myanmar a couple of years ago where I was working as an epidemiologist, and I'll be telling you about that.
Great, thanks for joining us, Sharmila.
Sure.
Good evening and afternoon, everybody. My name is Roy Dunsah, and I have a background in high consequence pathogens. In the diagnostics aspect, I have worked for the State Health Department for 15 years before my mission to Liberia. I've also worked in international consultations around laboratory diagnostics with the Association of Public Health Laboratories to Guyana over several years. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself, and I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Royden.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm Sue Johnston. I'm a clinical social worker, a mental health professional in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I just completed in April a mission in Myanmar with an HIV/TB clinic, and I'll tell you more about it in a little while.
Great. Thank you, Sue.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. My name is Tona Alimole, and I am a pharmacist. I joined MSF last year, and my background is basically in community pharmacy. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tona.
So I'm excited about this webinar for a couple of reasons. This is unique to single out the paramedical profiles, but also just excited to have all of you listening because I love to talk about who we are. So you know, to unpack it, we're an independent international medical humanitarian organization that delivers emergency aid to people affected by armed conflicts, epidemics, and natural disasters. And it's a lot, but each one of those things that I've just mentioned has particular importance, as you'll see. So to back up to the beginning, MSF was founded in 1970, a group of French doctors and journalists in the wake of the nutritional crisis in Biafra, Nigeria. So there were doctors working for the ICRC during the crisis, and they felt that the story that the government was starving their own people needed to be told to the world, but speaking out was not a part of the Red Cross mandate at the time. So these doctors separated from the Red Cross and started their own NGO to provide emergency medical assistance and really bear witness publicly to the plight of these people, which is the beginning of the MSF that we know today. So one of the pillars that MSF was founded on really is that independence. It's independence from all political, economic, or religious powers, and provides us this amazing platform to really assess the core medical needs. So you can see from the picture in our independence from political, economic, and religious powers, we're able to work in really sensitive areas, like this photo taken from the northwest frontier province of Pakistan near the Afghan border. MSF is providing healthcare to people who've had to flee the violence there. Financial independence. So this is actually a really, really important piece that needed its own slide. This is an astounding number, but 89% of our funding comes from private sources. And here in the US, 100% of MSF's revenue comes from private sources. So as I mentioned earlier, Pakistan is a particularly politically sensitive area. So MSF does not accept any government funding for programs in Pakistan or Afghanistan. And recently, some of you may have seen MSF's refusal to accept funds from the EU as a result of their handling of the refugee crisis, which I think is a great example of us being truly financially independent. Neutrality. So this is different from the independence that I talked about. We're not going to take sides in a conflict. In South Sudan, we had projects in both the rebel-held areas and the government army-controlled areas. So in order for us to be nimble and continue to operate in these politically charged environments that we do, it's really important for us to remain neutral. Impartial, I think a lot of people assume that that's the same as neutral, but really they go hand in hand. But this is regardless of a person or patient's race, politics, religion. We're going to base our assistance solely on their medical needs. So yeah, we define that by those who are in the most serious and immediate danger. So we're going to treat civilians or soldiers, but this photo I think is a great image, just in that it shows the one rule that we do ask is that everyone leaves their weapons at the gate, and we're going to treat everyone irrespective of who they are. Advocacy. So this is a really great shot. It in fact is just earlier this year, I want to say April of 2016. A big part of who we are is témoignage, and you'll hear us use this word often. It's a French word meaning to bear witness, advocacy. It's something that we as MSF field workers do. The photo montage shows USA MSF staffers calling on Pfizer to slash the cost of pneumonia vaccines in developing countries. And so really our role, we feel like, is to collect data and testimonies in order to speak out for those who can't speak for themselves. This is a great, I'm such a visual person, so I really like to see this map. It shows where we're working around the world. It's a current map, though it's always changing. This one shows our 2015 numbers. just gives you a scope of MSF's projects. But I won't hit every one of those bullet points, but I think it's interesting that only 16% of our field positions are filled by international staff, which means that 84% of those positions, field positions, are filled by locally hired, or who we call national staff. It's just really important to enable capacity at the ground level. Another point that I'll mention is of the positions filled by international staff or expats, only 45% are non-medical positions. And I know I was surprised by this number. I thought Doctors Without Borders, being a wholly medical organization, really is made up about half of non-medical profiles. So more than half of MSF's programs are responding to armed conflict or internal instability. In these places of instability, we're going to provide emergency health care such as trauma surgery, but in those contexts, will often also continue with basic health care programs, particularly if they existed prior to the instability. I do just want to point out that this surgical setting in the photo here, it was Syria, taken in Syria in 2013, and they're actually performing surgery in one of our inflatable operating rooms. Epidemic response. So this is another huge reason for MSF to start a new program. In countries where we work, MSF monitors morbidity and mortality rates. So for all of you EPIs out there, that's a critical role that you play. And actually, for all of the profiles that are listening right now, this is a huge part of what the paramedical positions help with. It enables us to respond quickly to the start of epidemics. Well, here's a picture of MSF's response to the Ebola outbreak in Guinea in late 2014. Another probably not as talked about epidemic we see is measles, and just for a scope of that, in 2015 MSF vaccinated a little over 1.5 million people against measles, so a huge number. But MSF, similarly, we respond to meningitis, Marburg, malaria, Kala-Azar, so epidemic is a huge piece we do. Malnutrition, so another reason MSF would step in and get involved. Currently, between armed conflicts, epidemics, malnutrition, those three make up more than 90% of our programs. And those three are often interrelated in contexts such as Democratic Republic of Congo or Darfur. This particular picture is from Chad, where we implemented a new therapeutic feeding protocol called Ready to Use Food, the acronym known as RUF. So in the case of this photo, I think I don't know if you can see what this woman is holding in her hand. It's a little pouch called Plumpy Nut, and it's just a high-calorie peanut butter substance. But 10 years ago, children with their mothers had to be admitted to feeding centers for several weeks. And with the introduction of RUF, mothers and their children can come to a clinic, be treated on an outpatient basis. So it just means that we can treat so many more kids than before. From numbers in the hundreds, now we can treat to the tens of thousands. So it's kind of revolutionized how we're handling malnutrition. And as with HIV treatment, MSF is a leader on the issue, and we'll put pressure on organizations like the World Health and others to just change the protocols. So this, to me, is just another good example of how we're striving to provide the best possible care, not just in an emergency setting. Natural disasters. So this type of thing is what often makes the media, and to be honest, this is where a lot of our fundraising efforts are quite successful. But it actually only makes up just over 5% of our interventions. One of the reasons that we're able to respond so quickly in these natural disasters is because we're typically present and running programs already on the ground where these natural disasters have happened. In each of our countries, we make sure we have emergency preparedness programs in place so that we can respond as soon as possible. In Haiti, so this picture is taken from the disaster in Haiti, and we had been working actually in the country for nearly 20 years before this earthquake, which meant we could react really quickly in January when the earthquake struck. So we were running a major trauma center as well as an emergency OB program with large numbers. It actually was a huge project, large numbers of national staff, more than 800 national staff when the earthquake hit. So these staff were able to provide first aid and triage until the emergency teams arrived shortly after. This particular picture I think is so fascinating. It's of an American surgeon just a couple days after the earthquake performing surgery in the parking lot of a former hospital. So a very, very unique, kind of unprecedented surgical context. So you've heard about the three main contexts where we work. Here's a slide showing the main areas of focus within those contexts. And I won't hit all of them, but I do just think for you paramedical folks, just to hone in on the vaccinations and epidemic response, the tropical or infectious diseases, mental health, typically present in sexual-based violence context, trauma context, adherence to some of those infectious diseases. So many of our projects provide primary care in the form of health clinics that are just providing basic care. The top 5 basic care needs that we see in our projects are malaria, upper respiratory infections, minor trauma, malnutrition, and diarrhea or gastrointestinal issues. This particular picture, although it's almost 10 years old, which is hard to believe, shows a clinic in Nepal where one of our national staff is the one actually performing the clinical checkup while the expat is doing training and oversight, which I think is just a great image that shows the capacity building we do with the national staff. Mobile clinics, you know, this is the same thing as treating someone in one of our primary health clinics, but these are often necessary in situations where the population is in flux or where patients can't access the regular clinics, or maybe the security isn't stable enough. So it's interesting because you know, it might be a team that does outreach by car or motorcycle. We've even had people on top of donkeys heading out, so it really just depends on the situation and where we are. But they'll see patients in schools, in their homes, under a tent, or you know, even under a tree. I've seen mobile clinics meeting, so wherever the needs are. So MSF provides temporary support to existing hospitals during a crisis or when the healthcare system is in ruins, or maybe it's, oh, can all of you hear our exciting New York streets behind me? It's hard to hide the fact that we're in the center of everything. But I'm going to be competing with a few fire trucks for a moment. But MSF also may run an entire hospital. So sometimes we'll settle up alongside an existing hospital, maybe being run by a Ministry of Health, or we'll open up our own. It really just depends on the context. I left this slide in just because I think it's, even though this is showing a surgical triptych of photos, I think it's really interesting to note that this is showing surgery, but any context can have a very different landscape. So in the upper left-hand corner, you see a pretty sophisticated, high-tech operating room, and that's in Pakistan. And down in the lower left, you'll see a less sophisticated one. They've actually set up an ad hoc OR in the living room of a home in Syria. And then, of course, on the right, the one I've already told you about, the makeshift OR in the parking lot of a Haitian hospital grounds. But for, you know, for any of the contexts, I think this is an example of really, we'll talk a little bit later about adaptability and flexibility, but I think being able to meet the patient's needs no matter what the context is around you, and not getting your mind wrapped around a certain way you've done it and a certain way you need to continue doing it. So on the photo here, we see a drug-resistant TB patient in Swaziland, and I think one of the challenges of the TB programs is the length of the treatment. So patient compliance becomes a huge issue, and just dealing with the really tough protocols surrounding the multiple drug-resistant TBs. So often, actually, for you mental health officers out there listening, often in these TB or HIV programs, we'll also have a mental health component to address patient compliant issues. I really like this slide because it's not only showing the large scale of a vaccination campaign, but it shows just the huge efforts of our logistics team. This really, I think, is one of the big reasons that MSF is able to respond so quickly and efficiently, because, you know, the log efforts going on behind the scenes. But I don't want to single out the logs, because really, I think when you get down to it, it's just such a group effort to pull off something as massive as a multi-day vaccination campaign where thousands upon thousands of people are vaccinated. So changing gears just a tiny bit, I want to drill down to who is MSF recruiting. Of course, you can see on the third line down, the paramedical, which is all of you out there. You can see the medical, which it's not at top because it's most important, but that's what Doctors Without Borders is known for. The OR staff, not all of our projects, but some projects will have a surgical component. And then down at the very bottom, of course, the non-medical, which I had mentioned earlier, makes up about 45% of the expat team in the field. So I'll just hit the general requirements. I've mentioned flexibility and availability, and this really starts kind of from the application process. I think someone who's, the process itself can be tedious, and I've told folks before that that's where we really start to find out the folks that are flexible. You need at least 2 years of relevant professional experience, which if you're wanting more details on that, you can find that online. And we need your duration for at least your first assignment to be anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And we do talk about the reason for the duration of time. The first 3 months, you're really just learning the job. And in the second 3 months, you're really starting to settle into your role and feel more confident. And it's in the last 3 to 6 months that you're starting to see some I guess, fruits of your labor, for lack of a better term. So we find that our first missioners just have more job satisfaction when they've been on a longer assignment. So that's not a recent requirement, but a necessary requirement. And on the next slide, Tim, we'll see more general requirements. An ability to work with an international team. I think it's interesting because a lot of people say that that's something that they really are most excited about. And I don't just mean diversity here in the U.S., but really you're working very closely with people who are from completely different cultures, who don't all speak English as a first language. And it's a lot trickier than the glamorous title of international team sounds. And I think anyone who has done this before knows that. Relevant work, relevant travel and or work. It's interesting. It's not just having done a backpacking trip across Italy or a cruise to the Caribbean. It's really being in a developing country context and living outside your comfort zone. And it's a skill, and it's not for everyone. And I think this is an important skill to have before you go out with MSF. Management experience. Every field worker will be in a management position in the field. It's often overseeing, but I think you need to not learn this on the ground when you head out on your first mission. It's something we want you to have had some experience before you go. Computer skills. Every MSF aid worker is going to have to write and submit reports, and many are involved in data collection. So this is It maybe goes without saying, but it's still an important piece to mention. And just being committed to MSF's principles. I think if you haven't, I touched on just briefly our mission, our mantra, but I think if you don't know that, I would go back and just reread on our website what makes MSF different from other NGOs that are out there. Age requirements, you have to be at least 18 years old to work with MSF, but you also need to have the 2 years of experience, so that most of our workers are in their mid-20s, but there's also no upper age range limit. We just require, regardless of age, everyone has to get a medical clearance from a physician to make sure that they're fit and healthy enough to handle the rigors of the field. We get a lot of questions also about whether MSF will send couples to the field, and the answer is no. Some couples have found themselves in the field together, but MSF is not going to bend over backwards to make sure that couples are placed in the same spot. If two people are interested in MSF, they're each encouraged to apply, though their interviews will be separate, their job postings will be separate, so it's certainly not a priority of MSF to place couples in a field. And last but certainly not least is having a foreign language skill is a major asset. Right now, the two top languages that we're actively hiring for are Arabic and French. Actually, Tim, can you flip to the next page? So the reason for that, you can see our 5 largest projects right now, or countries where we are having the most projects. South Sudan is an English-speaking context, so that is our largest. DRC, CAR, and Haiti all make the top 5 list. Those are all Francophone countries. So speaking French in a conversational, you don't have to be speaking perfect grammar and perfect accent. You just need to be able to handle the spoken communication for day-to-day work. But we currently almost 60% mission openings are in Francophone countries right now. So it's definitely a huge asset. Afghanistan is on this list. We are actually, we have a number of staff on the ground in Afghanistan, an Arabic-speaking country. Right now, for U.S. passport holders, we're not sending you to most countries in the Middle East. Jordan is an exception to that, but for most U.S. passport holders, the Middle East is not a context we're sending them. Application process, this just gives a visual. Right now we're at number 3, so if you've kind of vetted yourself, you've passed the general requirement expectations, the professional requirement expectations, you attend an info session. We do ask this in your interview process. If you haven't taken the time to do an info session, we think you're probably not ready. So good on all of you for being a part of this tonight. Filling out an online application, and we actually, this is an astounding number, 9 of our applicants don't ever make it into the pool. So 10% of the people that put in an application will make it to the number 9 stage or number 8 stage of a pool, in the pool in a match. And I'm not saying that to scare you away, just to let you know that this process is very competitive, and we're looking really for the best staff to provide the best possible care to our beneficiaries, our patients. So if you make it through the online application and your CV is pulled for a phone screening, we will carve out about half hour to 45 minutes to chat with you first on the phone, drill down on a few questions. If you make it past that stage, we would want to meet you face-to-face for a longer, more in-depth interview. And after the interview, if you make it to the next stage, we would invite you here to New York for what's called an information days. It's a 3-day non-technical training that really, I tell people, it's kind of a dating game. It's a chance for MSF to get to know our candidates in a little more in-depth, and similarly, our candidates are learning more about MSF, and at the end of that 3-day information days, some people decide this isn't the right fit for them, and MSF may decide at that point too. But if you make it through all of those steps, you're then invited as a candidate to sit in our pool waiting for a match. So we actually don't hire people for specific jobs. We hire people to sit in a pool, and we have a number of operation centers around Europe, 5 of them to be exact, who are placing candidates, not just here from the US office, from offices all over the world. So Japan, Australia, Greece, you name it. They're all seeing the vacancies throughout the globe and finding the best candidate for that. So that matching process can take some time, which is another reason that we've asked for the flexibility. Oh, benefits. This is a section that many people are interested in. You need to have a volunteer spirit to work with MSF, but you do get paid a small stipend. You can see on the third bullet point down. We start at a salary stipend of a little over $1,900 a month. But we've included all these other bullet points because we do feel like that factors into the whole benefits package. And if you have more details about this, certainly encourage you to look online, drill down a little more. So Tim, maybe at this point I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. Now we're going to shift gears and hear from our paramedical panel, and we'll start with Sharmila.
Great. Hi, can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So thanks for the introduction. So like I said earlier, I'm an epidemiologist, and I most recently, my last mission with MSF was in southern Myanmar in a city called Dawei. And Dawei has an HIV clinic that had been operating for the past 10 years, so really quite a long-running HIV clinic. And most MSF HIV projects throughout the world use a database called Fuchsia, which was created by MSF and Epicentre to collect patient data on their HIV patients. And Dawei was no different. So we basically had this database with 10 years worth of data, but nobody had really taken a good look at the data that we had collected. And so the medical coordinator that had recently come on thought it was high time for us to take a deep dive into the data. And so that essentially was my task. I think this was the only mission I did with MSF as an epidemiologist, and I'm not sure if this is necessarily a very typical role, but I will tell you about it anyway. I'll say that I would say that my role was probably you could lump them into three categories. And I'd say the first category, the biggest part of my time, was really doing, understandably, data analysis and writing up some of the analyses. So really taking a look at the data and trying to identify, we were looking at, for example, some of the things that I did was looking at some of the high-risk populations, like looking at the commercial sex worker population, looking at the the fisherman population. We, in southern Myanmar, are very close to the Thai border, and we identified fishermen as a high-risk population. And so doing some of these analyses, looking at some of the high-risk populations, and then trying to help target better some of our programs for these high-risk populations. So a very practical aspect. Also, I think one of the priorities for the medical director of our project was, since we had this long-running project, he really wanted to take a look at some of the patients that had been on antiretrovirals for the past 10 years, look to see what happened to these patients, and also was interested in looking at those patients that were still alive and still in our clinic, look at what some of the outcomes, some of their long-term outcomes, and particularly looking at some of the non-communicable diseases that they had potentially as a result of being on antiretrovirals for such a long time. So I basically wrote up a protocol, partly a retrospective study looking at what happened to these patients that had been on 10 years in care in our clinic, and of those that were still alive and in care, doing a prospective study to try to test and look for some of these non-communicable diseases. So writing up that protocol and trying to implement that protocol, that study protocol. Also, another part of analysis was looking at some potential operational research projects. Some of the doctors were kind of interested in looking at some different treatment modalities for some of the diseases that were being seen in the clinic. So working with some of the doctors in the clinic to try to help them figure out how to write up a good operational research project. So really a deep dive into the data with analysis and doing some writing of protocols, writing up some abstracts, and actually started to write up some one of the papers when I was there. I think a second category of my roles and responsibilities was looking at monitoring and evaluation and reporting. This wasn't necessarily something that was on my terms of reference, but when I arrived on the field, I recognized that some of the reporting from the different teams was really not ideal. I think reporting, writing up reports is not a particular forte of MSF, and so I saw that there was a need to try to improve this. So I helped the teams there with their reporting procedures and with their reporting templates, and also helped some of the teams look at the indicators that they had. There's a lot of indicators to see if your project is doing well, but I think they had been done quite a long time ago. Nobody looked at them with a critical eye. So I really helped the teams there figure out what are some of the best indicators, the best way to look at the indicators to be more meaningful. And then finally, I'd say that training was another big element of the work that I did. I worked with a very young data manager, but very motivated. She was in her early 20s, a local staff. She was really good at looking at the data in Fuchsia. I think she had been on board for the past year before I arrived there. She was really good at manipulating the data in Fuchsia, but Fuchsia was very limited in doing analysis. So I was really training her, how to look at the data, clean the data, export it, and I started teaching her some really basic analysis skills in EpiInfo. We chose to use EpiInfo. So those are basically some of the main responsibilities that I had. And I guess some of my take-home points about being an epidemiologist in the field with MSF. As an epidemiologist, you're really going to be working with some very basic tools. You're very unlikely to have SAS or any one of these more complex statistical analysis software with you. Most of the work, I think, in the field with MSF done by EPIs, most of it is done in Excel, frankly. You might have EpiInfo if you want to bring EpiInfo, if you have other software, you could use it. And I think if you wanted to request software like SPSS from headquarters, they might be able to provide it for you. But I think you need to look at this as something as really very basic analysis that you're going to be doing in the field. However, the analysis that you do is really going to be very, very practical and very, very field-based. And all of the work that we do in the field is really about how can we make our project better? How can we improve the outcomes for our projects? So I think that's something that you will notice that it's really, really very field-based. It's not going to be superfluous and academic. It's really about how do we make things on our project better. I think flexibility, was mentioned earlier. I think when you go into the field with MSF, you really have to be flexible. When you get onto the field, sometimes your job description might change a bit, so you have to be flexible. But I think that works both ways also. I think there's a lot of flexibility in the work that you can do. And if you see openings or opportunities for things that you can do, I think people will be very open to those suggestions. Like I said, I noticed that reporting with the teams was pretty poor, so I suggested better formats for that. So I think there's a lot of openness for you to take on additional projects and do things if it's going to be a benefit to the field. And lastly, I would say that I think the work that we do is really very, very impactful. I would say that I was in the field with MSF in Myanmar for about 7 months, but I found that my time there was incredibly productive. We work really, really hard. I mean, our hours were 8 to 6. We work very hard, but I think the work that we do is really impactful. And because of that, the work that we do is incredibly rewarding. And I think I'm over my time, so I will end there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharmila. We'll take questions that are epidemiological in nature at the end of the presentation in approximately another half hour. So Royden is going to share his experiences as a lab manager.
Thank you, Tim. As I said, I came to MSF actually as a mid-career professional, so it might be a little bit unusual, but my mandate was to give stories about my experience in the field and some of the transition aspects of this. So go ahead and change to the next slide, please.
Okay.
I was in Liberia from February and March 2015. I ended up taking a sabbatical from my health department job to assist with developing, actually constructing and creating the protocols and setting up a pediatric hospital laboratory in an Ebola environment, but not to test for Ebola, to work with the other conditions that were endemic at the time, or are endemic, including malaria, diarrheal diseases, and such. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience. And you've heard a little bit about the training and charter. Really, that starts in the United States, and with the information days and the way of looking at teams and the differences in international teams. When I started it, I realized that, or I thought that, you know, a lot of this training was to go towards, let's say, the expatriate staff and the national staff in Monrovia. But I realized there are a lot of team dynamics. In the picture, I'm the tall, awkward-looking aid worker, and my less awkward aid worker turned out to be my project director. An interesting thing about this, well, let me back up. And so he was from Czechoslovakia, and so really the international aspect does not just extend to national staff and expatriate staff. It's within the team itself. So the training is important. There was a lot of focus on the charter of the organization, and again, as a mid-career professional, I really focus on not how things are in an organization when they're running smooth, but when they get messy, and most missions are probably messy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But let me get back to training. This picture is not taken in Liberia. If you look at the bottom right, you'll see skyscrapers in the background. Both of these pictures were taken in Brussels in the Ebola training unit. They set up an Ebola treatment unit in downtown Brussels and went through our whole Ebola protocol, the whole MSF protocol. So I was lucky enough to get to know some of the people that I was going to get deployed with in Europe. That does not happen all of the time. A lot of times you're focused on, you're just kind of thrown into it. And that does take a little bit of flexibility. And like Sharmila said, there are also very strict protocols and some that are not so strict. The strict protocols are going to be around security and medical. The other aspects of life on the compound and such, let's go ahead and turn to the next slide. Life on the compound and some of the rules and functionality are going to be more flexible. So they really, I found, focus on being strict where it's important and having flexibility where it's important. So I put some of those to the test, and during the whole team meeting, put some suggestions forward. Some of them they took, some of them they didn't. But it was a very respectful way of functioning within both the expat team in the compound and then with the national staff. Before I was deployed and sent out, there was a required meeting with a counselor there on staff in New York. And that's really, I think, a dedication to destigmatize mental health. We could have talked about basketball, but really the focus is making sure that the team, that the person that's going out is as resilient as possible when they face some of these messy situations. And then when you come back, there's another appointment, and then there's the ability, it's a part of the benefits package of maintaining resiliency with those staff members. And again, I just thought that was very progressive and forward-thinking of the organization. This is in Monrovia. You'll see in the background this slide our administration offices that contain the pharmacy and headquarters. On the right-hand side, you'll see the warehouse, and the MSF logistics is really one of the reasons that the organization, in my opinion, is so highly functional. They can move things in and out very quickly, and it makes them highly functional, makes us highly functional. Within this compound, there's about 27 expats that comprised 4 teams. Headquarters and administration was one. An outreach, community health and outreach team was another. We gave support to an existing hospital, and again, we were building another hospital, and that was a team of 10. Next slide, please. And so here you'll see my colleagues, Gigi was the medical coordinator, and Selena is the laboratory referent, and she came out for a week during this mission. You'll see that the hospital was actually a apartment complex with some retail shops, half built. MSF got the keys on January 1st, and we actually got a functioning hospital by March 20th. The opening ceremony took the first patients. That's 11.5 weeks, and I think that the length of time was really caused stress amongst the MSF headquarters, that why is it taking so long? And really, I was amazed that they took this construction site and turned it into a functioning hospital in 11.5 weeks. In that time, I not only created protocols for kind of the complexities of dealing with sick people in an Ebola environment, but the triage shows that it's probably not Ebola, and how to give enough protection to protect healthcare workers while still having enough flexibility to treat malaria and diarrheal diseases. There was certainly some construction aspects to it, and even a measles outbreak while I was there, so I actually helped out with some of the line lists in an Excel spreadsheet. I worked for the health department, so I was a little bit familiar with the epidemiology aspect of it. But really, they're going to, on the mission, you're going to be utilized to the fullest of your extent. And so, again, that flexibility is really important. Let's go with the next slide. So here's a few pictures. On the upper left, you'll see the team for the hospital going out to the hospital site. We have our director and our water sanitation person and another laboratorian going out with us. One of the one of the health protocols is there was no touching allowed. So for 2 months, or the duration of my mission, we weren't allowed to shake hands, hug, no touching. And that certainly is made aware when you accidentally bump up next to somebody, you notice it. And that is outside of the normal human condition. So again, the focus on mental health and resiliency is very important, and I appreciate everything that MSF did for the national and expat staff, and of course the patients. The slide to the upper right shows one of our laboratorians who replaced me, the biosafety laboratorian who replaced me, and 2 of our national staff colleagues, Mo and Alex. And they were drivers, but when they had downtime, they were helping us actually construct shelving and put the laboratory together. Again, a testament to the fact that we're helping out in hiring a lot of national staff that's working in their own community. So a lot of motivation to do right by the populations that we serve. The lower left, was, us going out. In Monrovia, there were some certified, shall we say, restaurants that we could go out. So when somebody left, we usually had a little going out time, which definitely helped to blow off steam. That is not the case in every mission, depending on the security situation. But we did have to follow all of our security and health protocols. And it was really nice to be able to, again, go out and enjoy ourselves. So it is not all work, but most of it is. Our duration was 12-hour days, at least 6 days a week. So there was a lot of focus on functioning in this emergency. The lower right for you laboratorians out there is a rapid containment kit. So when I signed on for the mission, what was supposed to have happened is a biosafety cabinet, class 3 biosafety cabinet with gloves fully contained, was going to be delivered. And that had issues, so we ended up using what we could, and as a biosafety person, we could have stopped it, but I felt pretty comfortable that we could utilize this system and function. And again, that speaks to the flexibility that is necessary. A lot of the assays that were done were, let's say, waived assays, so not highly complex, but still helped out with blood transfusions and, again, the diagnostics going on at the time for this pediatric hospital. And the next slide is just a picture of me in the compound. The dormitories were 2 persons to a room. There are certainly ups and downs to every mission. One of the difficulties that I faced was actually spiking a fever while I was there, so we had to go through, our protocols of what are supposed to happen, of reporting and functionality. But overall, that was a very short period of time. Overall, I think what MSF has done, both in epidemic areas and non-epidemic areas like natural disasters, is something that made me want to contribute and sign up with this organization. And so it's something that I would say is not easy, but certainly very, very rewarding. And it's rewarding because it is so functional in the toughest places on earth. And I wish everybody well as you go through the process, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Look forward to answering any questions.
Well, thanks a lot, Royden. So now we're going to hear from Sue, who's going to share some of her recent experiences as a mental health supervisor.
All right, so can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Great. So as I said before, I'm a mental health professional. I'm career and mental health professional. So I've been working for about 30 years as a psychotherapist when I decided to take on a new challenge and joined up with MSF. Part of what drew me to wanting to work with MSF had to do with the values that they talked about at the beginning. Those are really important to me and consistent with my values, and that was one of the reasons that I was drawn to MSF. So I was placed in an HIV-TB clinic, actually 2 HIV-TB clinics, as a mental health officer. And my job was to provide support and training to it's about 15 to 18 psychosocial counselors that worked in these clinics. Additionally, I was also asked to provide training and support to a newly formed emergency medical team that would go out into the field when there had been post-conflict to address the medical needs of the beneficiaries. So when I arrived at my site, even though I had terms of reference, a job description written up, when I arrived there, they didn't really know what to do with me. This had been a MSF project that had been going for many years, I think 15 years perhaps, and they had been functioning just fine without a mental health officer there, and they weren't quite sure what to do with me or what mental health was anyway. So when I first arrived, I was not greeted with open arms like I had hoped to, but had to spend some time working with the staff to help them understand why a mental health professional would be helpful in an HIV/TB clinic and what I could do to support them. So most of my work focused on adherence, beneficiary adherence, and helping the staff find new ways to work with beneficiaries once cognitive education about HIV and TB. Once that was done and we still weren't getting adherence from the beneficiaries, what else could the staff do to support improved adherence? So I did a lot of work around trying to help them think about solution focus interventions, motivational interventions. Those are the kinds of things that I did. But I first had to develop motivation on the part of the staff to even use me. And I think that was one of the bigger challenges that I had. So do you want us to go to the next slide? This is a picture of the city I was in, Lashio. It's north of Yangon. It's in the central part of Myanmar. And this is the main street that I would walk to work and back from work every day. Once a month, I would get into one of those MSF cars and take a 6-hour, sometimes 10-hour, depending on the roads, it depended on the traffic, it depended on the conflict in the province, and go to another clinic that was right on the border of China, where I would spend about a week once a month working with the staff up there. So that was kind of sort of how it all shook out. Next slide. So they asked me to talk a little bit about my living situation, and this gives you a glimpse of the inside of the kitchen in the home that we lived in. We were a very small expat staff. There was at most, at any time, if we had been full expat, there were 4 of us. And we shared a house that each of us had our own bedroom. It was actually, I thought, relatively luxurious. I had Western toilets, running water, not always hot water, but that's okay. It was pretty hot most of the time. And a woman who cooked a meal a day for us. So we had a very nice living situation. Do you want to go to the next slide? This will show you the front door of our compound. And you would go through here. We have a guard that would watch over us. I felt very lucky to be living so comfortably. The others have talked about some of the challenges to flexibility, and I found that in addition to being flexible about how I found my way into providing help for the national staff, one of the areas that demanded my most flexibility was the expat team. When I arrived, there was a doctor that was not getting along with the national staff, and she was very shortly, about 6 weeks after I arrived, the doctor was removed from her position. About a month and a half after that, my program coordinator had a family emergency and left the project. And so for a brief period of time, I was the only expat there. A French construction log came to help work on building a new clinic, but he was injured and became sick, and he left after about 6 weeks in the project. So part of the flexibility I had to exercise was the coming and going of all these different international staff, the people that I lived with, my support system, and things didn't really steady up until about 2 months before I was ready to leave the project when a PC, a project coordinator, and a doctor were brought into the project. So that was one of the bigger challenges that I faced. Next slide. This is the inside of the clinic. You can see it's a pretty basic clinic. I would spend most of my days there either talking with the psychosocial counselor, sitting in on interdisciplinary team meetings, just sort of watching the flow of things, trying to develop some ideas about how to work with the beneficiaries. Next slide, please. And this is a picture of one of our groups that we did for our beneficiaries. They called it Roly-Poly, which had to do with developing resilience in HIV patients. And the man leading it was, interestingly, they called him a person living with HIV. He was a staff person who had HIV and was really a peer educator. And so I did some work with him about running groups, what we can do to keep people learning in engaged ways, group dynamics, that sort of thing. So I think the important thing I want to get across here is that the most of the work that I did, I was used to doing psychotherapy in the United States. I did none of that. All of the work that I did was supervision, consultation, support to the staff, training, and really a lot of the work that I was doing was building bridges and relationships with the staff to try to help them learn some very, very basic concepts about mental health, about adherence and behavioral health. So it was really very, very basic supportive work. Only occasionally, if there was a psychiatric crisis, would I be called in to do direct work with a patient, but then that maybe happened once or twice. So, you need to go in there with the understanding that you're doing support and training and management with staff. Let's see, and I would say, last slide, please. This is a picture of me with a health team in one of the clinics. Although I wasn't welcomed with a lot of friendly, smiling faces when I first arrived, after 9 months when I left, I think one of the most satisfying things is we developed a good working relationship with the staff. There was some basic understanding about mental health, about behavioral health. I've been able to build some sort of program structures that moved a mental health officer into supporting the staff without disrespecting their knowledge and their skills after working on their own for so many years. And that was a very, very satisfying part of the work that I did. So that's kind of a summary of it. I'll take more questions if you're interested. Be glad to talk to you more about it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sue.
Oh, one last thing. This is just a picture. I just wanted to show you this picture of, on the weekends when we weren't working, we passed our time by mountain climbing in Myanmar and going to visit some of the more beautiful pagodas that they had there. And that was one of the true pleasures when I wasn't working. So just remember there's some good times to be had that are non-work related as well.
Great. And Tona's going to share her experiences as a pharmacist.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Tona Alimole. I am a pharmacist. I joined MSF last year, and I recently returned from a one-year mission in Tiradzulu, Malawi. This picture was actually taken in my office, which also contains the pharmacy storeroom. We can go to the next slide, please. So I included this slide just to reflect my background. When I was applying to MSF, I was a little hesitant that I didn't have enough clinical experience. So I just wanted to put this out there so that any pharmacist who may have this hesitation, don't let it be one. With the management experience and the community pharmacy experience, it was actually more than enough for me to go into the project, into the field to do what I need to do and still really get that full MSF experience and contribute significantly to the team. And I'll go into more when I actually start to talk about my experience in Malawi. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the pharmacy storeroom. I'm very proud that it's very clean and pretty organized. But yeah, I will say that most missions, there's a lot more inventory, a lot more stock. But technically, this is what you should expect to see when you go to the storeroom, when you go into the field. Next slide, please. So in terms of what you'll be doing as a pharmacist or as a pharmacy manager, you will be given a job description. The basics are the same if you've been exposed to any type of pharmacy practice setting, whether it's in hospital or whether it's in community or retail. Anything else you do outside of that job description really does vary by mission. And as some of you have pointed out, you should be flexible. And the more you are, the more opportunities you get besides being in the pharmacy doing dispensing or just managing the stock. So it's extremely important that when you do get to the field, you get there with an open mind and you get there with a willingness to learn to what's going on in the project, and it will really help give you a full rounded experience in the field. Now in summary, I included some of the inventory management things because that will be the bulk of your project. stock cards, easy stock as pharmacists, managing the inventories, primary responsibility, cold chain and storage. Again, any type of exposure in any practice setting will apply when you get to the field. International orders and inventory, these are not daily activities. However, they do require a lot of time, a lot of pre-planning in order to be done correctly. And you keep in mind that a lot of what the project needs really depends on you as the project pharmacist. And you will be working with other expats, you'll be working with the medical team, so you're never, completely alone, but it's just good to have in mind what you can expect that you will be doing and be confident that what you've already done in your various places of practice will prepare you for what you will be doing when you get to the field. Dispensing and distribution, again, that's part of why you're there, or that's mostly why you're there. There are several steps involved in proper dispensing and distribution, not too different from what you're already doing, but it does contribute to, I guess, the bulk of your work and what will take up the most time when you are on the field. Data collection, analysis, and reporting. I think every expat position, there's a lot of data collection involved, a lot of analysis, and a lot of reporting, which you will be doing quite frequently. I was surprised at the amount of paperwork I had to do. I was not expecting it. But again, it's, as my first mission, as the presenter has already mentioned, it does take time to sort of get into the groove of what you're doing. But it was, you're working with a lot of people and you do have the support you need for the most part. And it is important to keep in mind that it's something that has been done before and you have a lot of resources to reach out to when you're stuck. Your team in the field will consist of expats and national staff. I had one storekeeper in Malawi. The expats, you would definitely work with them, especially when you're doing the international order. When on pretty much every aspect of pharmacy management, you end up working with everyone. At least that was my experience. As the pharmacist, I was a member of quite a few of the committees, which takes me to meetings. The particular project I was on, we were actually going through a handover phase. So that put a whole new dynamic to what I was doing as a pharmacist. And I will actually get to that in the next slide, please. Okay, so again, Malawi was an HIV project, and we were going through a process of handing over the mission to the MOH, which basically means it was closing. The pharmacy itself was pretty decentralized. We were not working out of a local hospital. We were just sort of supporting the health centers. There are about 10 of them and a main district hospital. We were also supporting our own operation research projects. We were also supporting our lab teams. So there was just me, the one pharmacist, and I had a storekeeper. And it was a lot. It was pretty intense, but again, it was a one-year mission. So I had quite a lot of time to learn what I needed to do. I had enough time to understand what the project needed of me. So I did have the satisfaction of, towards the end of my mission, being able to say, okay, so this is how I came, this is how I was when I arrived. And by the time I left, I was pretty confident that I had accomplished something. We worked very closely with the Ministry of Health, and anybody who's been with the field who's had to do any work with the Ministry of Health in most countries will know that that is another aspect, usually a challenge. It can be a positive thing, but diplomacy is extremely beneficial in that sort of relationship. And again, if you have an open mind, you learn a lot from your MOH counterparts. When it comes to supply chain, that was also one of the primary things that evolved while I was there. In terms of Malawi, I was looking at how their supply chain worked, which basically means when drugs are received from national suppliers, whether it be HIV drugs or opportunistic infectious drugs, how is it distributed? How is it stored? Does it get to the end users, meaning the patients? And as expected in most developing countries, there are gaps, there are issues. So part of my job was to see where those gaps were, and then try to develop strategies to improve them, develop ways to reduce them as much as realistically possible, and then do a lot of training. So I did have to do a lot of training, a lot of advocacy, meeting with some of these suppliers and saying, hey, in my district, we have shortages of this ARV or this, amoxicillin. What can we do to make sure that we have adequate supply? What can I do to get you guys to divert more drugs our way? Because unfortunately, when they see MSF is in a particular location, sometimes the other players hands off, and we just, it was just a lot of advocacy and a lot of training to the MOH staff that were in the hospitals. Next slide, please. So that was a summary of my experience in Malawi, and I would say in terms of the pros and cons, there was a lot of growth professionally, and I think, again, because I really embraced that flexibility portion of it. While there was a lot of time was spent just managing the pharmacy, I did go out into the field, into the health centers to do a lot of training. I had a lot of meetings with other NGOs, and just because that's really what I wanted to gain from the experience. And I do highly recommend it to any pharmacist who's, who will find themselves in the field. Be open, and be willing to learn. I appreciate that MSF is very independent. It does allow us to sort of do the things that we want without really depending too much on what anybody else says, which you will understand more, when you join the organization. And the expats, so much networking, so many friendships made. It really can be a great experience if you have a great expat team, both professionally and personally. And not so great. So going into the field, very ambitious, seeing all these, areas of opportunity in the country, in terms of drug shortages and this and that. I definitely went in like, okay, so I'm going to fix all of this before I leave. Everything is going to be perfect. But, as time goes on, you have to be more realistic and sort of adjust your own personal goals, your own personal ideas, and really curtail it. And so that was a learning experience for me, just sort of adjusting to what I could actually achieve by the end of. And it's already been touched on. So expats also, you live with them, you work with them. It can get quite interesting, especially when the different backgrounds come into play. So that's why I put it as a not so great, because again, being in this mission for 1 year, I saw a lot of people come and go. Even since then, maybe people not finishing missions, and it's almost never about the work, but mostly about, conflict within the group. So it goes both ways, but overall, most people finish their mission. We're very happy. We've remained close friends since then, and we've made other, professional connections. So I have to say it was a really positive experience for me as a pharmacist and just as a person. Next slide, I think that's it. Oh, okay, it's not it. So why did I join MSF? Basically, I felt that the values of the organization matched exactly with mine, with what I wanted to do with my life, with my career. And I would say for those long missions, especially if it's your first mission, you really have to keep that in mind. It's something that will motivate you and keep you going. Because if you don't really have a core reason, it's sort of difficult to go through when you think about your family, when you think about maybe your job or other things you left behind. But overall, it's just something to reflect on as you try to get involved in the organization. Again, expectations. When you get to the field, you have a job description, you get told, who's your supervisor and all sorts of things. Knowing these expectations and knowing your goals, it does help to sort of focus you on what you need to accomplish and what you need to do. That will help support the team. That way you're not doing a bit of everything, and accomplishing nothing. And be fair to yourself. Take the time to learn what is expected. You might find that you get there and you're expected to hit the ground running, but take the time as much as possible to learn your job and then go on from there. And I think I sort of touched on the other things, but they apply to pretty much every job, every position you you start being flexible, participating, communicating. These are the sort of skill sets or attitudes that'll help make your mission successful and help you learn what the project needs besides maybe what you expect that you will be doing when you get there. And time management speaks for itself. It's so crucial. Maybe the job description says you work from 7 to 4:30. Those are the official office hours. But it's not unusual, at least in the project I was in, to find people in the offices till 8 p.m. and later. So, you know, which can burn you out if you have a pretty long mission. So it's definitely something that needs to be spoken about. And I think that's it.
Well, thanks, Tona. Very much appreciated. So we'd like to hear from some of our participants. And if you don't mind going to the control panel, there's an expandable box for questions, and you can pose some questions to us, and we'll handle them here, or we'll refer to our participants, our panelists, I mean.
Right, so the first question, it looks like they are asking about which headquarter they should apply through, and does it make a difference? We have someone from Germany there. Hello. The question is, it does. We actually, we process through the MSF office here in New York, the MSF USA office. We will process people who currently have a citizenship status in the US. So it doesn't have to be a US passport holder, but if you're currently living in the US, we will process your application through here. Though if you have, let's say, a German passport and you're living in the US and you prefer to apply through a European operational center or the office in Germany, you're welcome to do that. But if you do have a US passport, often if you apply through another headquarter, they will point you back here to the US office to apply. It looks like there's quite a few people who have comments of inspiration.
So here's a question that's pharmacist related. As a pharmacist, are we trained in the field by another pharmacist, or do we have to learn the process on our own when we first get to the field?
Okay, that's actually an excellent question. So when you get to the field, usually you'll be taking over from another pharmacist. So there is a period of handover. It can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what the scheduling was like. Now, as a first missioner, I also had to go through Paris because it was an OCP mission, and that basically meant I had a few days speaking to the pharmacist reference. A lot of the medical people in Paris were able to give me pointers. When I got to the field after the handover, yeah, it did feel like I was a little bit on my own figuring stuff out, which is expected. However, you always have your medco. You have people in the field who have had experience managing projects with pharmacies who can give you pointers. And otherwise, you also have what we call a reference, or a reference person at the desk who is always there, accessible by email.
Great. So a second part of that question is also, did you take leave from your jobs to go on these missions? And this is a question that's posed in many forums. I know it's on many people's minds. I think we had several panelists who were mid-career, so I think whoever would care to jump in, Sue or Royden or Tona, about how you negotiated to get the time available to go on mission.
So this is Sue. What I can tell you is that I was in private practice, so I was able to just put a pause on my private practice for 9 months. I gave a lot of lead. I had a lot of lead time to do that. Actually, from the time I applied until the time I went out to the field was about 3 years. which was really a nice amount of time to prepare my clients for me moving on. So that's how I handled it.
And this is Royden. I had been with the health department at that time for about 15 years, worked on the anthrax crisis, SARS crisis, a lot of the emergency infectious disease response. And in my state, we were in a pretty good shape. I had a pretty large team, and I was a team leader. And so my leadership, when I asked to go on a sabbatical, I actually had enough vacation time, and certainly the mission was worthy, and the public health aspect of dealing with things, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we could get the epidemic under control at its source, it would affect positively everywhere else. So they bought into my request, and that's how I went about my leave.
Okay. Thanks, Royden and Sue.
Mm-hmm.
Sue, the next question is in relation to some of the therapeutic skills that you used when you were on your mission. And will having those skills in advance increase your chance of acceptance, I guess, within your team, not so much as an MSF applicant, but on your team when you're actually in the field?
I think it depends on the mission. The mission that I was at in Myanmar, they're very secluded from the rest. They had been very secluded from the world. So there was just a lot about mental health, a lot about how to support people in making behavior change that the staff didn't know. But as I said, they'd been on their own doing this work without a mental health officer for a number of years. And so the idea of what I could bring to them that would be helpful to them was not necessarily a given. I had to prove myself. And it wasn't necessarily my credentials or what kind of fancy intervention strategies I knew. It was, could I really, hear what they needed, respect what they already knew? Could I come in as a partner and not a know-it-all? So I think it was really was building relationships with people and helping them feel safe and secure. And opening the doors little by little for them to think in a broader way.
Okay, that's great.
Another question for a pharmacist. So basically, the question is about some additional certification in like supply chain management, humanitarian logistics. So Tona, do you want to reply to that? It sounds like a lot of what you did involve stock management, but this question was specifically for you.
Sure. So when it comes to if you need additional training, honestly, not really, not before I got to the field. However, MSF does have a lot of training opportunities. And after I got to the field, about 5 months into my mission, I was recommended for one of the stock management training. That helped a big deal. So I wouldn't say, maybe run out and do one privately on your own. If you can do the one offered by MSF, it's actually more useful to you to know like the MSF way of, managing stock. It's not too different from what you would normally do, but an opportunity would come up either early or later in your mission, or even when you come back. But I didn't find that it was necessary before I got to the field to do a stock management training. And I believe I see a question there about, I saw a question about, whether...
That would be helpful too if you could address that, Tona.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what I did, yes, to be honest, as the only pharmacist in the project with one assistant, the team does need, supplies in terms of dispensing and ordering and what have you. So that was the bulk of my project. However, because I wanted to do more advocacy, I wanted to do more clinical work, I was able to, and that just takes you being committed, doing what primarily the project needs, and then going out with the team, being more involved. And when you develop that rapport, that reputation that, oh, hey, she's actually very good in terms of, also reviewing patient charts or what have you, depending on the type of project, those opportunities will come up. But it's really important to keep in mind, if the project really needs a lot of, dispensing, and if that's what takes up the bulk of your time, then being able to manage your time to do that properly will free you up to do other things. And, I find that in the project I was in, people were really, they wanted you to do as much as you could, even if it went a little bit further than, what you were initially expecting to do. The opportunities are there. So as a clinical pharmacist, I absolutely would expect you can do those things, depending, again, on the type of project you go to.
Okay, thanks, Tona. So, Royden, here's one. For laboratory staff workers in the field, would previous research academic laboratory experience be helpful, or does MSF seek laboratory professionals with clinical lab experience?
Thank you for the question. It really, what my experience is, it's very clinical oriented. So a lot of the hospital protocols in the United States would be the ones that they're looking for. I do have a lot of research experience, but really this mission was focused on really biosafety and, again, the non-complex assays that are needed to look at, basically blood chemistries and some of the pretty simple hematocrits and such assays. So I did not find that, I certainly can't say for every mission, but for mine, that research experience was not necessarily helpful in my case.
Okay, and here's another question related to your expertise, Roy. You spoke about managing the biosafety aspect of the hospital. Does MSF hire expats to work in laboratories at the bench, or are lab tech positions more management/biosafety or overview focused?
So I think it was Rebecca that said that every expat is really going to be in a leadership position. But having said that, there is a need for general bench work. Certainly, at times the work is going to get extensive. So it's really, from what I've experienced and from talking to my colleagues, the lab colleagues, it's going to be a working leader position. You are going to be expected to be that supervisor, scheduling, and such. It is a team environment, and certainly we had great great national staff as opposed to the expatriate staff, those that are from international environments. But yes, it's going to be a leadership position, in my experience. And Rebecca or Tim, if y'all want to comment on that more, you might know better.
Yeah, I just had a look at the time. That's a great answer. There's a number of questions that are kind of in relation to recruitment. There's an EPI one, but I think actually it ends up looking more like a recruitment question than an EPI question. It asks if an EPI would be able to go to the field for less than 9 months. The answer is sometimes. For first missioners, it's really important for us to have a 9-month commitment. There are a couple of profiles in our gas pool that we do ask for a lesser commitment, but for every other profile, it's really important to us that there's a 9-month minimum. So sometimes, once we have a commitment from you of a minimum of 9 months, it could be that a project is proposed and it's a 6-month project. So that does happen sometimes, though the commitment we need from you is still 9 months. And that often would be the first factor that plays into a person not making it to the second stage of the application process if they aren't able to commit to 9 months. Tim has mentioned that we have time for a couple more questions. So as I scroll through the questions, there's quite a few that are recruitment related, and so I don't want to take away any more time from the panelists, but I thought maybe I would just, Tim, if it's cool with you, take the last. You said there's time for 2 more questions.
Sure, please do.
Someone asked, do I get to propose a project, or am I always at the I'll read it exactly how it's written. Can we propose a project to do with MSF, or is the work with MSF always assigned by MSF? So the answer is MSF does pick the project for you. On the first mission particularly, if you've had a history with MSF and you've done several missions and you feel like you have a skill set and you've heard about an opening, we're definitely open to hearing where you would like to go, but that helps with some longevity in the organization. So that's that happens sometimes as you're with the organization for longer. Another has to do with benefits. So this will be our last one. Can family members get health insurance through MSF, or is it only for the participant? It is at this point only for the participant, though there are some benefits through, I want to say it's COBRA, that allows for, it's not COBRA, but something similar to that, where there is a discount for the family. It's still fairly steep because MSF does offer a very comprehensive medical insurance plan. If you happen to have a project, these are few and far between, where some of the management team at the headquarters, if they is a safe enough, secure enough post where you can bring your family, then family is covered under health insurance, also for a lesser amount in that context.
So we've gone a little bit over time, and thank you for staying with us to the end. We appreciate everyone's commitment in joining us tonight, and I particularly wanted to thank the panelists for all their preparation and for sharing their experiences, which are always highly, highly illuminating. So thank you very much. If you still feel strongly about your questions and we weren't able to get to them, you can email us at event.rsvp@newyork.msf.org. And that email address appears right here. And I don't want to skip over this slide because Rebecca is here motivating some local youngsters.
Where'd you find that photo?
And finally, we're going to ask you to complete a 3-question survey. It'll be emailed to you. So if you have other things to do tonight, you can get to it tomorrow. We'd love to get your feedback, though. And that wraps it up. So thanks very much, and please go to the site and take a look at the application page if you're strongly motivated by all the information you've heard tonight.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.